Well, Barry Bubolz from NRCS. I work with the demonstration farms in eastern Wisconsin. We have 6 demonstration farm networks over there. And so I get the privilege to work with a lot of producers that are leading the edge on utilizing rye, cover crops, and soil health. And so when we were talking about or thinking about different topics for meetings here, we kept coming back to managing rye, being adaptive, how to handle rye with weather conditions that we get, here in Northeast Wisconsin. And so with that, I think I want to start with probably 5-6 slides, just kind of giving us some background on that. I first want to ask, how many of you guys and ladies have rye in your fields right now? So we got a good amount of rye out there, and everybody's 100% comfortable on how they're going to handle it this spring. I see a few that are saying yes, and a few that are have a little bit of a nervous look on their face. So I think it really comes down, to goals. And so I got up there what the goals of cover crops are, and there is a lot of them. And so we heard last night, if you were here, and it kind of really hit home, the carrot approach and the stick approach. Neither one of them should probably be the reason that we're out there planting cover crops or rye. Okay, we got to have. It scares me when I see people that are just doing it for the cost share, or that they're being, beat on to put the cover crop out there. There should be a reason there on that page, that is driving you to that decision on the farm. So I think really it really depends on where the starting point is. So you see 4 different pictures there. Obviously, the starting point for where you're going to get to that point is different. The forage aspect is obviously going to have a different planting rate. If we're planting green, we may not be going with it. We're probably not going with the same planting rate. If we're looking at weed suppression, or if we're looking at maybe an organic system, our rates might be very different. So I throw this up there because, like I said, I work for NRCS. This is probably one of my biggest pet peeves that I have. I get a lot of phone calls, later in the spring, where people will say, how do I plant into this? And we get to that conversation, well, how much did you plant last fall? Well, I want to plant green. It's my first year, so I put 2 bushels out there. And I'm like, that's a conversation that we should have maybe started having, or a planning opportunity that we could have had in the fall before. And so, a lot of times when people ask about planting rates, we get laughed at because we say it depends. It truly, truly depends. Where is your goal out there? We got some of them listed there. Seed quality, that plays a role. I've heard people talk about, that this morning, keeping their own seed. Planting date. We can have some real extremes in planting dates. And so if we're in a silage situation, rye in September versus rye in October, it's 2 different animals. If you want to multiply those effects, the last session talked about manure. Manure will take rye and multiply it many times. And so we have to, be aware of that. Our literature that comes out of our agency a lot of times talks about using a bushel. Well, in fact, a bushel might be more than what you really need. Or if we're trying to do something, maybe organic or crimping, maybe that's way less than what we should have out there. So it truly depends. So you got your goals figured out, you got your plans figured out, you've talked to your agronomist, you've talked to your conservation professional, laid out this really rosy picture of how this is going to work. This kind of looks like 2021 over on our side of the state this last year. We had good planting conditions for planting green into. We got the corn in, at a fairly nice time period for the second week of May. middle of May. It went all in relatively fast. We had good moisture when we started planting. Failed to mention we didn't get any moisture in June, but that's another story. And we had really good harvesting conditions this fall. We didn't rut up fields. So I throw the easy chair up there. Like, this is a pretty easy process to pull off, right? Like, every year this is the way it's supposed to work. So before I bring us back to reality, I throw this slide up there for reasoning of rye. And it's probably a little bit hard to see, but these are a lot of different cover crop species. And so why are we utilizing rye? It's really, it really comes to, it's very clear in this picture, I'm sorry, our graph. It's one of our deepest rooted cover crops that we have out there. It is a species that we can plant the latest. Aaron mentioned this morning, we can grow it on concrete, which is basically true. It doesn't need, gloved hands to make it grow. And so we look down here in regards to this picture. This is a picture I took actually quite a few years ago now, but just shows the planting or the rooting densities of different planting times for cover crops. Whereas the one on the left is actually an interseeded scenario, whereas the one on the right is more of a September planting versus a mid to late October planting that we had. These were out of Sean. So, but again, why rye? We heard it this morning in some of our breakout sessions. We've documented it with a number of the producers here. Is after 5 years of utilizing rye, it is not uncommon to increase organic matter by a tenth, each year. So we're using rye, and we have to play with it. We have to be adaptive. So I told you I was going to bring you back to reality. It's not an easy chair scenario every year. Every once in a while, Mother Nature sits there, laughs at us, throws curveballs at us, whatnot. For those of us on the eastern side of the state, this is 2019 in a nutshell. That's the first week of May, and we got 2 to 4 inches of rain falling. And when they said 2, we probably got 4. But curveballs, best laid plans were out there in mid-September. I hate to break it to you, but that's not mid-September planted rye right there, Sometimes it's late. So bringing us around here, we need to be adaptive. And so we have the opportunity today, and we got 3 panelists here. Jason Cavadini from the UW Marshfield Research Station, agronomist, assistant superintendent there, and he also has a farm of his own also. Webb, Pierce County land conservationist. He tried to tell me he was a part-time farmer. I called him out on that when he said he's farming 500 acres and also running a custom operation business on the side too. So don't cut yourself short. And Derek Ducat here in the center. Deer Run Dairy, Triple D. Derek's been a very steadying influence in the demonstration farms over there and how to make these systems work. And so just jumping into this is going to be probably the last slide where I'm going to do the majority of the talking, and we're going to hand it over here. But it starts with spring assessment, okay? And so coming into spring, we should have a fairly good idea, because we talked about our goals. Maybe we're thinking about forage, maybe we're thinking about planting green, but we need to be out in those fields, okay? So are we thinking about forage? Are we thinking about planting green? Are we thinking about this new thing called roller crimping? Oh, by the way, our crop plan may change. We talked about our joys of alfalfa. Alfalfa winter kill in a really short period can change our crop rotations. You guys know that. And maybe that field that was intended for forage harvest is now going to be something else, or we need to take it for forage. So With that, I am going to start our panel discussion. You guys can use that one, I guess. Okay. You need to pass that around. So, Rod, just to start this off, you've been planting green for a number of years. So I guess what I'd like you to talk about here, the picture that I have up here for operation, is how has your termination strategy shifted, throughout the years? You can give us a little bit of background on how long you've been until
Okay, thanks, Barry. Well, I guess I'll start back in 1998. We decided to go from more of a conventional tillage farm into significant no-till. So in 98, we started with no-till and beans. And then 99, we went to all beans, all corn, and alfalfa. So we fast forward through the learning curves of the no-till early on, and we get to, I guess, when the coverage came in 2012. We had a real dry year that year. Our alfalfa was very poor yield, so we needed some forage to feed our steer operation for the winter, so we chopped some corn silage. Being a county conservationist for many years, I harped on all of my corn silage guys every year about you can't have bare ground. You got to do something after that corn silage. So I had to listen to my own advice, and we planted cereal rye on our corn silage acres. And I talked cover crops for years with guys. I never did it. So we jumped into it, and it was amazing. Very pleased with the results. So our first go around with it was planting soybeans into cereal rye. Like I said, it worked out just fantastic. So the following year, we decided that all of our soybean harvested acres also would get rye on it. But getting to termination strategies and how we look at it is, the first year or two we had rye, we were nervous. We listened to the advice that was out there at the time that 10 to 14 days before you want to plant, you better have that stuff getting crispy. So we went out there with a whole bunch of glyphosate, burned it off, and within about 3 weeks, there was no residue left. It was amazing. Our longer no-till fields, there was much soil biology activity out there that the rye that we turned crisp when it was 4 or 5 inches just disappeared. So we looked at that right away and said, we're not gaining a whole lot going through this motion, kill it off right away. So we moved in quickly into letting it grow, getting the corn planted, and waiting until later, several days to a couple weeks, depending on the growing season, terminating it. It's been talked about earlier today about last year and some of the dry conditions that growers experience. So I guess that kind of gets to where we have to make sure we're adaptable with our termination strategies and not just have one plan. We have to make sure we address current conditions and make that judgment call, be ready to terminate when we need to, but also if we have good moisture to let that crop keep growing for a little while and give us some more biomass, because our benefits we want.
Rob, one of the things that is another benefit of letting it go a little bit longer was share a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Sure. my thoughts on slugs is, you know, we have mostly well-drained soils, but we do have some somewhat poorly drained soils that are prone to having more slugs on it. And we've had slug issues over the years with no-till like everybody else. My feeling is if I leave that rye cover crop growing out there until that corn starts coming out of the ground, and giving those slugs that are out there something. They're gonna eat at grass regardless what it is. So I found, at least on our farms, that we're seeing a lot less feeding on our young corn plants when they still have that green rye out there. And it looks like they'll feed on it for a few days after we even terminate it. So it's giving that corn plant a little bit of time to get up, get growing, and be able to handle the potential slug feeding later on. So that's kind of what I've seen as far as slugs.
I guess, just moving on. Here, you know, got some slides up here, kind of showing rye, this past year. And so, you want to share with the group kind of your termination strategy, your, a little bit different.
Yeah, so I guess just a little background. You know, we also did some no-tilling, you know, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, but then we expanded our dairy and kind of got away from it due to manure. And, you know, not that we had to, but one of the solutions was incorporation for manure back then. So, so we moved back into, you know, or wanting to get back to no-till, and, you know, rye as a cover crop was one of the, you know, easiest ways to get back that direction. So when we first started, I guess we were also, you know, terminating the rye probably 15 days before planting. You know, we were also nervous, you know, first year, it's like, you know, we didn't want to see a whole lot of residue, didn't know how the planter was going to handle it, all sorts of things like that. But the next year, you know, Barry kind of had mentioned, you know, let's maybe try and plant a little green and see how it goes. And, you know, so we started doing that, and we were terminating then probably, you know, if we could do it 2 days before we were planting, or 2 days after, you know, on maybe half the acres that we did. That's how we were terminating at that time. And we ended up getting caught on probably 100 acres where when we had terminated previous to planting, and it started raining, and it didn't stop raining. So we had to wait a long time to get back on those acres. You know, they stayed wet. And once we got back on, it was like standing straw, and the corn planter, I mean, everything on it was wrapped full of residue, you know, and it was kind of a, you know, kind of a bad experience. So we pretty much the next year just went, you know, full into planting green and terminating, you know, after. I do think this year we may let some grow a little longer, but I think we really got to watch, you know, what kind of moisture we're going to have before we go too far, you know, with letting it, you know, stay green after planting. And it not 100% last year, you know, if we had a good window where I knew we could get it planted, we probably had 100 acres that we had them terminate. You know, while they were terminating some that we had already planted, I said, well, go ahead and do the next, you know, 100, but that's only because I knew we were going to get it planted. So that's kind of the, you know, how we've moved our termination strategy to after, and planting green, and everything that goes along with it seemed to get or become more forgiving. I mean, with the planter, you know, all the conditions, you know, seem to go easier planting green versus, you know, terminating first. So.
Jason, you're up. You know, we've got this, these three producers all the way from the western side all the way to the eastern side. It's kind of a straight line. And so Jason sits in the middle on some beautiful marshfield area soils and stuff. You want to walk the group through decision making on?
Yeah, and I'll back up just a little bit first. So I'd say in the last 5 to 7 years, I've worked with rye in almost every way possible, everything from grazing it on my own farm to harvesting it in the spring, and now the last 3 or 4 years we've been roller crimping it as well. And I think when it comes to making decisions and how to integrate cover crops into our system and species selection and everything like that, one of the biggest reasons why people consider rye is because of its versatility. And I think we all know that, and there's a lot of people here who have rye growing on their farms. But I think the thing to remember, because of that versatility and sort of the multi-functionality of rye, is there's like a million different directions we can go with that crop. And that's advantageous when you think about the fact that we're planting it in the fall and all the stuff that happens between planting and spring, and there's all these different factors that can sort of change the course. So, you know, some of these cover crops that we talk about interseeding don't have quite the functionality as rye, where, you know, we're planting something that's going to winter kill. There's not a whole lot you can do with it. But with rye, there's this whole decision-making process in the spring. And I think that's really what I wanted to get through in my part in this presentation is, once spring rolls around, if we've got a green growing crop out there, what's this sort of decision-making process that we go through to decide what to do with that crop? And so I really think, you know, especially in forage systems, how our other perennial crops, especially alfalfa, make it through the winter plays into things. You know, what our forage needs are coming out of winter, that plays into things. How well the crop makes it through the winter, that plays into things. You know, if you're gonna roll or crimp it, we've done enough of it to know that there's a certain density of rye that you need there for that to actually work. And if coming out of spring, you can tell that that density isn't there, maybe you didn't quite get the germination that you wanted to in the fall, then you need to start making some decisions. So maybe it's not really going to work the best to roll or crimp this. So what do we do next? Do we kill it right away, or do we let it go? And so I've sort of followed the same path as these guys described. I used to buy into the thought that we have to kill this stuff right away to avoid it becoming a weed. But when you think about what the goals of that cover crop are, that's really not, it really goes against the goals to get out there and kill it right away, especially, you know, we're planting it late. And if we're going out there and terminating it early, we're not getting the maximum functionality out of that crop that we think, or that we should be able to. So lately we've been really pushing the envelope in the other direction and planting into the stuff green and tall and killing it later. And I think as we get further into this presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the decisions for killing it. But I would definitely say that if we're going to terminate the crop, killing it later is the direction to go.
And so that brings us to the slide in regards to herbicide termination. So as I had a chance to talk to all three of these producers up here, this topic just kept coming back. There was these little nuggets that they just kept throwing at me. And so I guess, Rod, you wanna start us going on this one? You know, what your feeling is? How do you get that best termination? the key this spring, whether that's because of weather or because of, product inputs that we're dealing with.
Well, I would say for the people that were in the session this morning, I think Dale, we talked about this, temperature is huge when you start looking at termination. Trying to terminate rye when it's 45 or 50 degrees out is a lot of analogies we could use for that, but it doesn't work very well at all. So I think what we look at is we get the corn in the ground as soon as the soil is ready, and then we start watching that crop and start watching weather to see what it's going to do, what our forecast is, and kind of grow as long as possible. Let it get the air temperatures up there, get those days up in the 60s, and then our volumes, our amounts of herbicide that's needed to effectively terminate that cover crop go down significantly. Just cleans up so much nicer, and it seems like it's okay to have a slow die on your rye, so you don't have to use real heavy rate of glyphosate on it. You will get it terminated, get it killed, and if it dies off slowly, as long as it's dying, that's what I like to see. And then that residue lasts longer into the summer.
Jason's thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I would reiterate what he said, that the most important thing is not, so if we want to follow a rye cover crop with corn and not see that corn crop suffer, I think the two most important things are waiting until the soil temp is ready for the corn and not planting until it is. And don't spray until the air temps are right for the herbicide. And I think one thing that we found is, in this sort of learning process of starting out spraying really early and now spraying really late, we found that there's a pretty big window that we can spray this stuff and be successful. And so we can afford to wait a little bit until we have the right set of conditions for planting the corn and killing the rye. And I just think understanding what those conditions are and being patient is very important.
As you speak, you also run a custom operation, cropping operation, so you've been influential in getting other producers in the watershed going on this, but planning is a really a big aspect. And so maybe when that doesn't occur, you want to share that?
Yeah, so, every time, yeah, Barry and I were going back on a story that I had, but, so we had a farmer that decided, his rye looked really good and he wanted to harvest some of it, for a forage. So, we backed off. We were originally going to spray that before we planted because there was a substantial stand there. But so we got about 2 days before that we were going to cut it, and he decided that he no longer wanted to cut it. He wanted us to just no-till it in and get it planted. So that's what we did, but I didn't follow up with, his the guy that does his spraying immediately, and he wasn't able to get there then. So it ended up being planted. We put fertilizer down with the corn planter. We put starter and we put some 28 on also. And I think a lot of the fertilizer got captured by the rye before it got sprayed, and a lot of the moisture got used up. So it's very important to make sure that everybody's on the same page with what's going on as far as termination and all that. Last minute decisions like that can really affect, the outcome, and his corn suffered for a while. I mean, it pulled through, but it would have been a simple, something simple that could have been avoided if we'd have did a little more planning ahead of time. So, and that's the one thing, you know, as far as us determining, you know, when we're gonna terminate, you know, if we are gonna let, you know, some of the earlier planting that we do go a little bit longer, you know, we may have to supplement some fertilizer earlier because what we put on with the planter could get captured with, you know, by the rye and we'll get it back later, but it's not gonna be there up front. You know, but we can't determine all of our acres, you know, ahead of time. So I'll still put the fertilizer on with the planter and, that way we still have the option of when we want to terminate it. All of a sudden it starts looking like it's going to stay dry. Well, hey, it's planted. We gave it a couple days. That's long enough. I don't want to take that risk of giving it another 5 days to use up moisture. So.
Soil moisture consideration. So, we've touched on this a little bit. You know, I think there's several of us that may be concerned about it for, you know, going into this coming spring. Dry it is, but I asked our panelists up here to kind of, to hit on this topic of, you know, how does soil moisture, play a role in your decision?
Yeah, so I know I just touched on it a little bit, but, you know, I still don't believe we would terminate before, before planting. We're still gonna plant green. And then after that, we'll make our decision on what the forecast looks like, or, you know, see how much subsoil moisture we have, which so far this winter in our area, we haven't had much snow. We haven't had a lot of moisture even last fall. So it's something that we'll be keeping an eye on. But we'll still make that determination after we plant green, so.
And so, the dairy farm, just to get a little bit of context there. A little bit more water capacity.
Yeah, I would say that moisture considerations would be, in my view, and we've collected a lot of data over the years to try to see, looking at both soil temperature and moisture, if there's an adverse effect from that cover crop being out there, and we have never seen it. And even data collected through the drought in 2012 showed that the rye cover crop did not have a detrimental effect on the corn that followed. But the only time I've seen moisture conditions really affected is when that crop is not living. When the crop is green and living, the moisture regulation of the soil is really good, actually. It's like whatever it sort of buffers you from extremes on both ends. But when it's dead mulch, that's when you could end up being, and someone was saying that earlier, the dead mulch could keep you out of the field for a while because it's just gonna keep conditions wet. And I think that's enough to make me afraid of killing that stuff well in advance of planting. I'd rather get planted first and then kill it.
So you heard two guys that are dealing with the heavy soils, a little bit out of the weather. We're talking about the water pump on. Rod, you have some lighter soils, some character, you know, some experience over there. Where's your feelings on that?
So I guess it's, the number one point is know what soils you got, where you got your cover crops. You have soils that are prone to being limited on moisture. If it goes dry for 10 days, 2 weeks after planting, you got to make sure that you treat those soils, those cover crops differently. You definitely don't want to have a condition where we dry out the seed zone all the way down to where we finish the farm seed. You know, on our farm where we got mostly well-drained soils, they're not, they're just on some, but we do have some valley soils that will get light of moisture if it doesn't rain for a couple of weeks. So we make sure we do have a plan in place that if water gets shut off, that we go after those cover crops first. But on the other side of it, we have our somewhat poorly drained soils that I want to keep that cover from as long as possible. It's helping it dry out. We seem to have a much healthier the corn crop if we can rye growing and keep it drying out the top couple inches. We kind of got both ends of the spectrum.
Just real quick, I don't have data or anything to show, but I remember in my soils classes, there's like this classic, if you follow soil moisture or temperature over time, it's gonna be like this. But when you have a green living crop, it's taking those peaks and valleys and it's flattening it a little more. And so I think over the years, as I've talked about this with people, I've seen, I've gotten skeptical looks, but if we think about it, that green living crop or any green living crop is just protecting us or buffering us from those extremes. So that's basically what we see when we have rye out there.
I really wanted to have the opportunity to talk about some of the crimping termination strategies that he has. But then also, a lot of times we're thinking about crimping only being an organic system. And there is some hybrid options there that we've been exploring.
Yeah, so last year was our 4th year working with that system, and actually it was the first 3 years that we did it, we were experimenting with no-tilling soybeans into rye, and then last year we did corn and soybeans, and it's more of a hybrid system, not necessarily full-fledged organic. One of the goals is to try to take some applications of herbicides out of our management system within a season. And so what we've seen, and again, this is a system that requires a lot of management and forethought. So not only, this is where choosing the right even variety of rye starts to come in, and the right rate and the right planting time. When we're talking about forages or just a cover crop that we're going to terminate in the spring, there's a lot more room for error. But when we're roller crimping, there's some more specific conditions that we need, and I think we have to be prepared for in the spring. If we don't have those, what we're going to do next. But what we've seen, so in a lot of these rye systems, when we talk about terminating in the spring, we can't really get away from coming back through with a cleanup application of herbicide at some other point in the season. So we're still looking at a couple applications of herbicide, but if we're roller crimping, it is very real to think that we can eliminate one of those passes. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we're interested in it, but also just having that mulch, putting all that organic material back in the soil.
So pivoting on one of our other options that we have in the spring is forage planning. And so we started talking about that when you have a producer that wants to go to forage, what, how do we get from this point to that point the fastest?
So I guess planning would be the most important key, know that you're going to take it off, for sure, kind of have that termination plan, if you're going to, do a pre, burn down of it, or if you're not, depending on how you want to handle it after, but just making sure everybody's lined up to be able to go. And then I think as soon as you harvest it off, the sooner you can be out there to plant it, the better, because the ground is, is still holding some moisture and is going to be more forgiving. The longer you let it after harvest, the harder that soil becomes. And, especially up in our neck of the woods, with the heavy clay, it can kind of turn into concrete after the fact. And luckily, most of our area, there's a lot of dairy farms that are doing it. So, we have the option of maybe putting some manure on either before or after to help us with that situation if it happens. But I'd say the key is just to make sure the timing of everything is lined up. If you want the best success, afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on that, or there's feeding manure out there. We were kind of talking about in a session before, you take that rye or triticale off, you gotta replace those groceries. I mean, they're most in the pile. So you got, that kind of just leads me into our one of our last slides here, is the nutrient planning aspect. Because dealing with rye, it does change how we put our fertilizer out there. So Eric, you got the microphone, maybe you wanna start what your system is when you're planting your
Yeah, so I guess we are doing multiple applications usually of manure with a dribble bar. So we'll either depending on the fall, if we can get 2 passes on in fall, we'll do it that way, or if we do 1 in fall, depending on the growth or weather conditions, or staying off the field unless it's fit, we can do some in spring also. And then we will put starter fertilizer on with our planter, and also either 7.5 up to 10 or more gallons, 28%, with the Yield 360 coulters, which we were dribbling it on also, which works. We were just using agrotane, so we thought we could cut out the agrotane by having a system that puts it in the ground. And then when we come back and side dress, we're usually speeding that up now, depending on rains and how that's going to come. But V2, V3, we're getting fertilizer out there, nitrogen already, knowing that the rye, is probably holding quite a bit of our available nitrogen from the manure, and then releasing it on the tail end. So we're not that concerned about getting out there too early, and definitely want to, if there's a chance of a good rain coming, I'd rather see it out there early enough than waiting and then missing that rain, and then, wondering if we're stressing the corn because there's not enough there because the rye, did take it all. So
Rod, from a pasture system that you don't have the ability or very much majority to utilize, what's your process? How you get
Well, our planter carries a blend of 1034 of either 28 or 32, depending on what we source that year, and then ATS. We just mix it all together, and we chose to go with the dribble out the back, so it's behind the dawn curve time closing wheels, but in front of drag chain. So I think we're getting a little bit of incorporation with that drag chain, and we don't move a lot of residue with our planters, so there's, I guess, cover the good moisture there to hold. And so that's what's going on. We're shooting for 35 to 40 pounds a head with the planter, and, about 3 or 4 pounds of sulfur, and then we come back at 24 to 30 corn with one white drop system, our big white drop system that we put on the balance of our nitrogen and 28 or 32% ATS point. It goes on, we dribble that right on the grounds.
Yeah, when we first transitioned to no-till and planting green system, it was our belief and all the farmers who we interacted with that we needed to get about at least 50% of our nitrogen out at planting time. And I don't think that that's totally wrong, but what has changed that for us is we used to side dress around V5, V6. But now we try to interseed all of our corn acres, and as we interseed, we're also side dressing. And in this journey of interseeding that we've been on over the years, we started out thinking, well, we're gonna interseed when we side dress. So we were just by default interseeding at V5, V6. Well, we found out that was too late. So now we side dress when we interseed. And we're pushing the envelope more and more every year with interseeding. So now basically we say when we can roll the corn out and the conditions are right, we are gonna start interseeding. And that's when we get the rest of our nitrogen on. So we don't put quite as much on in the front end as we did a few years ago, because we know that not too long later, we're coming through to put the rest of it on with side dressing.
I think the other thing that kind of stood out in our conversation with these guys up here too, as we move through this journey of, soil health, building our soils to be better, I think we're seeing that also on the front end, where maybe that rate of nitrogen right up front might not have to be as high as when we started this journey, into improving our soils and stuff. That kind of stood out to me. I throw this picture up here. I really wanted to put a picture of Twan Howard, the coach from Michigan, in the middle, rolling with the punches, but not maybe that's not appropriate. But, this is actually 3 pictures that I had of the same field of Derek's from 2019, and it just really drives home the point of rolling with the punches in the weather that we encountered in 2019. And so at this point, I really want to open it up to you guys,